It's gonna be one of these days. Still haven't really figured out why. On certain days it just flows and on other days it doesn't. You know, we're refreshing the same exact ratio, and in theory the tank is behaving in a very similar way. It's got a set program, but for some reason I think it's actually, maybe, if I had to speculate, related to when you happen to catch the starter when you need it. So the tank essentially has a cooling mechanism, and that's it. Like it cools and stirs. It starts at a particular temperature and then it just cools and stirs. If the temperature starts to climb, then it cools some more. So I guess in theory, if I dispense the sourdough starter at a point at which it just cooled and stirred a lot, because when it's cooling, it's also stirring. So building strength in the batter dough, and so maybe that is why on some days I can fill up an entire bucket in a matter of seconds, and on other days I have to go to the length of actually kind of feeding it out the auger, which dispenses it fine, but you know, get my hand messy in Harriet for a little while. Nothing that I'm not used to. In fact, this is pretty much the only time we get to interact at this level anymore. If you think about it, like, spent years mixing Harriet in buckets, you know, multiple times a day. So I won't complain too much about having to sort of manually dispense, because it gives me a chance to smell and to interact and to check on, and then make decisions thereafter. Our management of Harriet is more passive than it used to be, because we've delegated some of the task to the tank and trusted that the tank does, and it really does perform really well. And for the scale of which we would have to be making buckets of sourdough around the facility by hand, this is a really nice adaptation, which we're still definitely growing accustomed to. We have to be mindful of the fact that just because we have this tank doesn't change our need to properly manage our sourdough starter. So it does such a good job that we can actually let the sourdough starter go a lot longer between feedings, because it has a way of keeping the sourdough starter far more efficient than it ever used to be. So our sourdough starter is leavening at a rate that is better than it was leavening in the garage. There's no doubt about that now. And what we've also found is that we can't really see a meaningful difference in bread performance between the tank being 1 day or 2 days from the time of feeding. We know that the sourdough starter changes in that time. It's not like, you know, fermentation just stops. But as far as effective leavening of bread, it's still doing a fine job at that level at 2 days. What I'm noticing, though, is far more of I'm noticing that we have to now counterbalance. This is 2 days, actually. We mixed with this same batch yesterday, but today it has more acetone in the smell profile, versus like citrus acidity, and those are two different processes. The acetone process is actually the same process, I believe, that it takes to make alcohol, which some sourdough starters are more prone to having that sort of more sour profile. But I can tell you right now that the bread that we mix with this today will have a heavier sour to it than the bread that we mixed yesterday. And so that's also something that we have to consider. Yes, there's a convenience factor of, like the bread will still leaven, but there's also this factor of, well, the bread might taste slightly different. So we still have to find our balance. The tank for a little while was too big for how much we're using it daily. So we like do our refresh and we barely fill the bottom of the tank, and the tank itself's not working well with that small of an amount of dough. Just go back to our first interaction with it, actually, where we got like these, it's like stretchy goop. It's too little material in there. So we've now countered with trying to take it 2 days. Eventually this will self-correct, because eventually we will need more sourdough starter on 1 day. So the design of this facility is not designed for just this moment in time. It's designed to carry us into the future, even though we're baking at a pretty high scale right now. So I've got my auto lease set up here, and I'm ready to basically take this into the rest of the mix. I'm going to do some basic bowl maintenance though, because this is kind of my last opportunity to incorporate this dough into the mix. You can also, at this point, probably find a lot of commentary on mixing technique through many of the other videos, but one of the things I know I've discussed is that if you don't do this scraping down to the bowl, then this is just going to end up becoming more cleanup later on. This auto lease at this point has probably been going for about an hour. I was doing a number of other things in between, and so now we're finally ready for it. I'm going to add the starter to it. Right now my schedule has been working out really nicely, in the sense that in the course of the week I've managed to make it to most of the baking stations at least for one substantial shift or activity. Lamination, mixing, baking. And it's good because at this stage in our bakery, every single station's evolving. And it's intimidating at times, but we are in a new space still. We've only been here for a couple months, and every week right now going into our busy winter season, we're baking at different levels. We're either introducing yet another special, or baking more quantity of something, and 1 week to the next might seem somewhat similar. But if you then just simply zoom out to 4 weeks, and every single one of those weeks having been making incremental change, 4 weeks later you've made like substantial leaps in what you're doing. And what we've noticed along the way is we're getting better at preparing in some ways, but then in other ways we are not prepared enough. So when you're sort of running on all cylinders, we still don't have a full roster for this facility and staffing. We found like the preparations are harder to think about, all of them. Like, and you get to the point that certain things sort of break the schedule. Like the one added block of pastry, broke the rhythm. So we have to still find our groove in here. And that's really why I'm bouncing around, where then I can have conversations with the other team members who are in these positions the rest of the week and say, what are you observing? Here's what I observed. Here's what we can do to improve given our current situation. This is my first time at the mixer today, and my big takeaway so far is just the sourdough starter. And noticing like a difference in smell that is not concerning, but is something significant that would mark a change. over the way that we've sort of historically managed Harriet. So me observing that is important, because if you continue forward and you're not observing the changes that are happening, then you don't understand why other things change along with it. In this case, like, that might not necessarily be a bad thing, but I don't want to end up mismanaging something as important as a sourdough starter. So when you notice a change, I think it's important to be engaged enough to be able to call it out. And that's something that we've been struggling with in the new facility, is that there continually is more to do, requiring more hands, and we have the ability to have as many hands as it takes to get the job done efficiently now. We don't have like a rule that says we can't have employees, but now we have to kind of get everybody on the same page. There's more people to get on the same page. And at this point, we have had a lot of reps, so there's a very big difference in even somebody who's baked a lot coming in here and working with us versus our own experience over the last few years. So it's interesting putting this all together. So far, it's going pretty well overall, but it's a lot, and I think it's important to remember that, because it's all too easy to just look at, oh, it's a beautiful space and it's a fulfillment of a dream, but understand that fulfilling any kind of dream requires a lot of commitment beyond necessarily the rate of pleasure. It is pleasurable, but it's also a really huge weight of responsibility to do it right. Last ingredient for this mix. Today's mix is actually really fun because the vast majority of it is dedicated towards education and not production. So we did our grand opening last week, and along with it launched kind of the second half of what this facility was designed to be, and that's a classroom. So we had our first set of workshop classes. Sorry, I'm looking for... Oh, no wonder. I need to go grab a bag of salt, and we store it next door, so that's probably why it's not in the bin. Now I'll be right back, but it'll be like a few minutes. So a year ago, I had to know that basically we would move into this place, and for a little while, everything would be pretty much exactly as planned, and then we would need to start thinking about a phase 2 development. And that phase 2 development was supposed to be the grocery store next door. When we first looked at this building, it just so happened that the same exact wedding venue that occupied this building also occupied the next couple units and moved out of all of them at the same time. Those of you who were around for this might recall that I had a very small window of opportunity to plan out this floor plan. And so I was sitting there making calculations, sort of thinking about where might proof be a year from now or 2 years from now based on everything I know today from my garage. And it struck me that we would run into an issue of where to store flour and other important ingredients, as well as run into an issue of where to store finished bread before we can get it out the door. We have space on this floor for up to 6 pallets of any type of dry ingredients, and that's a lot. It's it's more than we need right now to an extent, but somehow, like, because of everything we're doing, salt ended up in the basement of the unit next door. Well, you know, we're going to have to at some point probably put some sort of a lift in next door so we can get flour downstairs. And that's what's going to help us as we make more and more bread on a weekly basis. Okay, so finally adding the salt. Setting up the mixer here. Got a couple minutes to incorporate the ingredients, followed by about a minute and a half of developing gluten slowly, followed by 4 minutes of developing gluten really at a faster pace. That faster speed, if you're going slow like we used to, it's like a factor of 2 that you have to go. So like our mixer in first speed at the garage had to mix roughly twice as long during that last segment in order to achieve the same result. So gonna get this started, and as I was saying, the vast majority of this dough is going towards education. So we're gonna be making these pumpkins with our class participants on the weekend, this weekend, and for the next several Saturdays in a row, we have these pumpkins lined up, and then we're going to shift to another class. And soon thereafter, we're going to be doing this somewhat regularly, where there might be multiple classes happening in a given week of varying types, from art to really technical, from one day to multi-day, from 1 hour to extended timelines in the bakery. We're really excited about exploring this rather than just continually going in this direction with bread production. We're already at an incredible level of bread production for our small team. It's staggering, really. And, you know, our products are as good or better than they ever have been. But we need to now start considering just buttoning up all the sides of our production, focusing on the little things. When a new person is introduced, they see just a fine oiled machine at every stage. Of course, that's easier said than done. If you're introducing new people, that means you need them. That means that there's something that's not going accordingly. There's never really a perfectly smooth environment, because that would just be stasis. That would mean nothing's changing. And the idea of nothing changing in a place like a bakery is just crazy. Things will change around here. So going through this mix, I need to add the bassinage water still. So this is a smaller amount of water that we use to add into the mix at the end. There's another video specific to this topic. If you want to learn more about it, scroll back in the feed. You'll be time warped back into the garage and get like a really detailed explanation as to the benefits of using a bassinage and why we've chosen to do it. So I'm going to add this water in a couple parts, just over the course of this last bit of mixing. I'm no longer in that incorporation mode, which is the counterclockwise direction, but rather in that slower gluten development mode right now. So I'm going to add this first part at the very end of that. The gears are going to switch momentarily, but I'm going to let this run for a minute. I've got 4.2 minutes essentially until this mix is completed, and I need to add the rest of this water in that time. So I'm going to let it incorporate for a minute before I come back and add some more. Time to get to the rest here before it's too late. Some of our bread just needs a little bit more fermentation time. You can tell because I just took a look at the oven. Getting a little bit too much height through the center of the loaf, like vertical, which is a telltale sign of just being under. and its fermentation. Nice thing is, to start the day here, because we have it open, we fire off like 1 deck of everything, minimal amounts. We're going through a marathon bake today ahead of market day. So anyway,